Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Mark, for bringing us all together here today. And really, it's my honor to be able to sit here with you today, Greg. Greg and I have known each other for about 5 years, but I don't actually think I know of one other singular person who has made such a difference in patient-led movements. So thank you for everything that you've done, and I feel that you are going to be providing such valuable things here today for the audience. Um, so most people probably are familiar with your work, specifically with the Cancer Moonshot under back then Vice President Biden, and then as the president of the Biden Cancer Initiative. But I was hoping that maybe we could start with you taking us back to some of the other organizations you've led, which have all been very patient-centric, specifically the Myeloma Research Alliance and Faster Cures, which are two very different types of organizations, but probably had very similar missions in terms of galvanizing patients and science forward. So could you talk us through maybe a little bit in terms of your approach with those two particular organizations and how what you may have learned through that evolved towards the work with the Biden Cancer Initiative and the Moonshot?
Sure. And thank you for those lies you said at the beginning that I wrote out for you. When I left the Gore office in the Clinton administration in 1997, I started a consulting firm, and one of my clients was a biotech CEO. He developed multiple myeloma, and he called me one day while I was waiting for my kids at the train station. This was in 2003. And he said, Mike Milken's looking for a guy in Washington, and I told him, you're the guy. And I said, I have a job. It's my own company. I'm doing fine, thank you. And he said, well, wouldn't you like to talk to Mike anyway? I said, well, sure, I'll talk to Mike. Well, he had him on hold. And he put Mike on the phone, and Mike, as Mike does, asked me about my kids, my mom, He said, hey, why don't you just come to New York and we'll have lunch? Well, a week and 3-hour lunch later, I had left my consulting firm, which was really hard to explain to my wife, and started Faster Cures. And there's something Mike said that I'll never forget. His only scarce resource was time. And that's why he wanted to start Faster Cures, not for any particular disease, but to change the system. And the metaphor we used was that every research organization is trying to create a jet engine to put on a train, but the track won't let it go any faster than it did when Lincoln was president. So our motto was that we were building the track for everybody else to run faster on because they didn't have the time or the money to do that. They're focused on the science. So that was our mission, to make life easier for everybody else. We did not give grants. We were not about money. We were about changing the culture. And we'll get into it later, but pretty much everything we started in 2003, better patient-led clinical trials, data sharing, biobanking, all of that stuff are still vital issues today. None of it will be resolved. It's a constant fight. The Melanoma Research Alliance was completely different. Leon Black's wife had melanoma. It was not caught until it was stage 2, which always comes back. So they wanted to start an organization, and so we did something unusual. We brought in about 30 people in a very small room to make the temperature go up, and we started the meeting by saying nothing is working in melanoma. Now, the people who'd been in melanoma their whole life, Stephen Rosenberg, Don Morton, they weren't real happy with that, but the young people in the room all knew it was true. Well, those young people are now people like Jim Allison, who won the Nobel Prize for the work that the Melanoma Research Alliance helped fund in CTLA-4 and checkpoint inhibitors. But Melanoma Research Alliance, when we had all the young bucks and the old bucks in the same room, the young bucks kind of let them have it. They said, you guys have been doing the same thing for 20 years. You're not listening to new ideas. You're not listening to new technologies. So when we funded that organization, we did 3 things. 1 pot just for new people, just for postdocs. 1 pot only for institutions that collaborate outside their border. And the 3rd pot was for the old guard. And by dividing the money up so that some of it was devoted to young people and some of it was devoted to collaborations, they made a lot more progress than they would have if they'd done it the traditional way. So those are two very different things. Melanoma Research Alliance was about the funding and the science. Faster Cures was about the culture. And I'm very proud that both of them have done very, very well. Ben Isner, that we were talking to last night, is partly funded by the Melanoma Research Alliance. So those were challenges that I had no background in. As my wife will tell anybody who asks, I've never taken a job I knew how to do or that was a pay raise. And that's worked out pretty well. I mentioned to Mark earlier today, though, and this is very relevant for the Taxel Foundation. I spent the first year of Faster Cures. I was by myself. I hired one other person. I spent the first year convincing all the other nonprofits in Washington that we were their friend, not their competition. Everybody thought Mike Milken's going to come to town, take all of our money, put it in his thing. So I literally, with Friends of Cancer Research, Research America, National Research Council, ACS, all these groups, I spent literally a year meeting with them to develop an agenda we could help them with money that was not their money. And after that year, all of a sudden, people started working with us. And then it became a very large success, especially after I left. I'm very happy that the women who have run the organization since I left have done a phenomenal job. And in fact, Faster Cure's COVID program was a daily update on everything known about COVID vaccines and therapeutics from around the world and was incredibly impressive. So yeah, it's possible.
It is possible. And you did mention that you spent a lot of time kind of developing those relationships and collaborations. And that's really key, I think, for us to drive forward any of our work. But looking back at your career, do you have specific examples of what you think might be your biggest win for patients over the time? Or perhaps on the other side, what maybe is one of your biggest regrets that you didn't see happen during your tenure?
Well, we started an organization called TRAIN, the Research Acceleration and Innovation Network, which now has over 100 and something members of foundations around the world so that they could share innovations, share data, share big ideas. That was a major achievement to get patients to work together. Everybody's been trained to compete. Well, money for Alzheimer's, no, money for Parkinson's. That's not a good debate. What we need is a bigger pie, not people arguing over slices. The regret I have is that you can never take any of this progress for granted. We made a lot of progress in data sharing in the early 2000s when data was really hard to find. Now it's much easier to find, and we still have problems with data sharing. We were working on diversity in clinical trials in 2005. We still have a huge problem with diversity in clinical trials. So the thing that I regret is that the progress these organizations have made has not been equally distributed in our society. And my focus today for the second moonshot, if they were to ask me, is that the second moonshot should focus on diversity of access to these solutions we have for the cancers we have. If we don't let all members of society have the chance of surviving cancer, we're not doing our job.
And if somebody were to come to you and say, what do you think about the NIH or the potential new organization of AARPA-H? What are your thoughts on that in terms of where are we now, where should we be, and what does the future look like with a potential AARPA-H?
Well, I've been working with NIH and with Francis Collins since he came to town in 1992. He actually came to see me in the Gore Transition Office in 1992 because he'd been hired by the Bush administration. And he asked if he still had a job. And I said, Dr. Collins, we know who you are. Of course you still have a job. We would love for you to have a job. And I've been friends with him ever since. And when I was in the White House, I would go out and spend days with him to go through labs and see what was going on in the early days of the Genome Project. But NIH is still doing things pretty much the way they were doing them after World War II. grants are a year, takes a long time, failure is not rewarded. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So there are a lot of things that could make a difference. In 2007, we wrote a report with David Baltimore, Ed Benz, Gail Castle from Eli Lilly, Merle Weinberg from the National Research Council, Alan Leshner, the head of AAAS, that said, NIH should take the on-campus program and turn it into a center of innovation. And that's basically what's happened now with the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, which is a new thing with $1 billion that will be located at NIH but report to the Secretary of Health. Its mission is to be the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency for healthcare, meaning to do the innovative research, technology development that individual universities, companies, scientists cannot afford to do because it's very, very risky. But when you succeed, it makes enabling technologies that are available to everybody. The premier example was DARPANet became the internet, right? Nobody in the private sector would have ever built the internet. It was the Defense Department that built the internet. And what would the world be like, and there's some good and bad here, without the internet, right? I remember when we were debating whether to allow commercial activity on the internet. Think about that for a minute. There was a debate about whether to allow commercial activity on the internet. So the AARPA program has the potential, if NIH can keep its hands off it long enough, to do really dangerous, exciting work, which is not NIH's mission, and we shouldn't try to make that NIH's mission. It's AARPA's mission. So I'm cautiously optimistic. It's a battle of cultures. It's a battle of cultures. And my son, who didn't even tell me he was doing this, is an advisor to the National Center to Accelerate Translational Science, NCATS. And I found out after the fact that he got a director's award for creating the Children's Rare Disease Research Network in the cloud for the Cincinnati Children's Hospital that serves all of the children's rare disease world. He told me that after, I didn't even know he was working on it, and I was very proud of him. But what that told me was there are centers of innovation inside NIH, and we need to support them as much as we can because we need both. We need the day-to-day engine at universities, but we also need people who are thinking way out into the future.
That's great. And so my final question to you is, as we're here with the rare cancer group here, what is your advice to those who are looking to galvanize the community together? What kind of last words of advice would you leave to this community?
Well, there are so many ways that you can begin a foundation, and a lot of foundations disappeared in COVID. My wife is a consultant for nonprofits, and what she tells people is whatever your problems were before COVID just got a lot bigger, and you really have to work hard to survive. But when you're starting like this one is, I think the first thing, even though it's a deeply personal mission, is to remember it's not about you. It's about all of us and all the rare cancer groups. So finding a role that allows you to collaborate with everybody else to make life easier for them will give you credibility to do other things like lobby NIH for creating a grand challenge conference around rare cancers, lobbying the Defense Department for funding some of the work that may not get funded at NIH. I think it is a crucial thing when you're starting a foundation to think, what is our mission? What is our purpose? How do we differentiate ourselves and yet be able to collaborate with everybody else? It's not about the money. It's about the focus, and it's about the speed. I really am a big believer that most of the breakthroughs in this area will come from private investment. So you need to keep a window to the market, because I've been looking at AI-based drug discovery companies for the last year, and I can tell you there's a lot going on that NIH wouldn't even know about. So collaboration, having a purpose that fits in with everybody else, and keeping a window open for the private sector, I think are really important things. So now I get to ask you questions. Catherine got the job the old-fashioned way with the Biden Cancer Initiative, which was she cold called me on LinkedIn. I'd never hired anybody that way in my life, but I said, this woman emailed us on LinkedIn, and so I had her meet with the team, and they all said, you got to hire her. So we did, and it worked out. So the Shepherd Foundation, you started that from scratch, and you achieved some really wonderful things. Can you explain what was your organizing principle when you started it? What was the thing that was on your mind?
All right,
And
tables
maybe
have
tell them
turned.
what it is, yeah.
And just to let everyone know, that was the first and last time I've ever sent a cold email to someone on LinkedIn. So the Shepherd Foundation, I think I learned so much from you through the Biden Cancer Initiative, where we were a newer organization that was founded to look at rare cancers as a whole. Not focus on one specific type of rare cancer. When I came on board, I did a landscape analysis of all the rare cancer advocacy organizations here in the United States, and there were over 400 of them. And so immediately I was like, well, okay, my job is done because there are so many people doing such amazing work already. The challenging thing for us was really trying to define exactly what you were saying earlier, where our lane was to be able to still provide value, not only for the patients that we were serving, but for all the other organizations that existed as well. And so instead of taking a very narrow focus view, we took that 30,000 foot level view of looking at the system that rare cancer finds itself in and asking the question, if there was one thing that we could do differently, it would change. It would change potentially patients' lives. It would change the organizations, how they work. It will open up new avenues for innovative treatments. So I actually reached out to all 400 organizations and asked them, what is it that you do, and what would you find valuable for an organization like us? Because going back to what you said, it's not about competing. It's not about trying to take anybody's money. It's about really providing that additional value. And what we landed on was we decided we were going to write a law. And that law was to mandate insurance coverage of molecular diagnostics for all cancer patients at the time of diagnosis. And we felt this was one of the most powerful ways that we could really start changing the landscape for cancer patients in general. And so why did we do this? Well, because first of all, molecular diagnostics is not equitable for all cancer patients. There are some, especially in the large comprehensive cancer centers, where molecular diagnostics is provided and funded for. But what about those in the rural areas that don't have access or the money for a $5,000 molecular diagnostic test? What happens to those people? We felt that it was a right for patients to have access to the information about their own unique disease, because as we know, rare cancers are a very complex and unique diseases. We have discovered that there are over 400 types of cancers, and 380 of them are considered rare. That's 95% of all cancers. So we're not looking at one or two diseases here. We're looking at hundreds of diseases. And so for us, we felt that not only do patients deserve to have this knowledge as well as their clinicians, but it would provide better outcomes, better treatment options, possible clinical trial participation. And on the flip side, that data that is collected is what is key for driving new innovative treatments and therapies forward for patients that don't have data to begin with. And that's what that equitable piece for us. So it is called the Cancer Patient Equity Act, and it was just introduced in October of last year. So for us, our organizing principle was finding that one thing that could change for everybody, and able us to really galvanize the community around that. And that was really key for us at the Shepherd Foundation.
Sounds easy. Call 400 people and ask them what they're doing and see if they like you. Would you mind sharing the quote you gave me without the name about the first response you got to starting the Shepherd Foundation from one of the leaders in rare cancers?
Right. So, as probably everyone here in this room knows, all pediatric cancers are considered rare. And what you might also know is that the pediatric cancer community is a very tenacious one. They make a lot of waves. They've made a lot of progress. When we came on as the new kids on the block, one might think that, everybody's excited about the work that you're doing, that we all want to collaborate and work together in harmony, and that is not always the case. We met with this very prominent pediatric cancer advocate. I was very excited to share this with her because I felt that she would be a really great ally for us. And she said to us in the meeting, she said, "I'm so sorry, but this is never going to work. You guys are too young. You don't know what you're doing. And the pediatric community will not rally behind this bill." And I just kind of sat there for a moment and I was like, because this was not the reaction I was expecting. And I said, "I'm so sorry you feel that way." I was like, hopefully in the future we can work together on something else. And we turned around and we of the 80 organizations that signed on by the time the bill was introduced, I think 65 of them were pediatric organizations, because our goal at that point was to prove that we could get it done, and we did. And that day that it was introduced, she sent me an email with just one word, and it was "congratulations." And so I felt, well, that's a win.
Right. There's nothing automatically popular, even if you're doing the right thing.
Right.
So how did you balance the constant pressure over money and fighting for money from the government and from philanthropists with the mission to get molecular diagnostics paid for, to define rare cancers, to change the culture around the way we research rare cancers? How did you resist the temptation to just be about money?
Right. And one of the big things that when we asked all these organizations, what do you need? The one thing that they always come back with is, we need more money. And so, in fact, the bill that we had initially drafted was very different in the beginning. It actually included $500 million for rare cancer research, which nobody would touch on Congress. They felt that money was too much and the bill would never get passed. So we actually had to remove the funding amount from the bill and just have the molecular diagnostics be the core centerpiece of that bill. So we decided we'd actually attack the funding in a different way. And we lobbied for additional funding through the Department of Defense. They have a program called CDMRP, or Designated Medical Research Program. We lobbied and was successful to get $42 million from FY20 to FY22 specifically for a rare cancer research program. And this program allows researchers who are maybe at the beginning of their program, who don't have much preliminary data, but it is important that we start a particular research track for a particular cancer that may not have any research behind it. This program is designed for those types of grants. So that was the one track we went down. We also got $10 million for the FDA Oncology Center for Excellence as well, specifically for their rare cancer program. So I think it's important to recognize that, yes, we think of NIH being the end-all be-all for funding, but there are other avenues and resources available for rare cancer research. And it is really important for scientists to do their homework in terms of what else is out there that may be able to fund your unique and innovative research going forward as well. We also, in our bill, had a definition for rare cancer, because as all of you sitting here know, there is no current US definition of what a rare cancer is. And we felt, how can you tackle a problem if you can't even define it? So in our bill, we had a definition to define rare cancer as 6 per 100,000. Now, why we chose that number is because The NIH sometimes uses that number, sometimes it doesn't. The American Cancer Society is supportive of that number, but also across the world, that is the number that is used. And we felt it was really important to start standardizing how we think about rare cancers. We took that out as well because people didn't, there was an issue with defining cancer in the bill. So we took that out because the lawyers weren't quite sure what to do with that, because cancer has actually not been defined legally. And so we couldn't define rare cancer if cancer has not been defined. So, there's all these issues that are just sitting out there that need to be tackled and resolved. And there are so many groups that are trying really, really hard to do that. It just takes some time.
So let's talk about patient involvement for a minute. When I was at Pfizer for 2.5 years, I was the senior VP for global policy and patient engagement. And we did a really radical thing. I even hesitate to bring it up. It's so radical. We sent thank you letters to patients who had been in clinical trials. The first company to do so in 2012. Can you imagine that? I was standing next to Monsef Salawi, whom you may remember was the head of Operation Warp Speed. He was at Glaxo. I was standing next to him at a conference when I was at Pfizer, and I said, we just started sending thank you notes to the patients in our clinical trials, 150,000 patients a year. He said, wow, that's a really good idea. And I thought, how did our mothers raise us that we haven't been sending thank you notes to people who risk their life in a trial, often for no benefit to themselves, and yet they hear nothing. They get no feedback. We started a social network for them to feed back to Pfizer. What was your experience? Did you feel you got better health care or worse health care? Did you even know what the trial was about? Did you know what the results were? And we provided them results in English written by third party. Radical in 2012. Nobody had done it, which is mind-boggling. So in rare diseases, it is so much harder to find the clinical trial patients and to collaborate with biotech companies, big pharma companies that want to do some of these trials. How did the Shepherd Foundation approach patients to get them to risk a lot to be in these trials?
Yeah, I think so. The Shepherd organization as a whole was a little different in terms of how it's organized, because our founder, David Haisong, was diagnosed with a rare cancer at the age of 27 and felt very compelled to do something. The first thing that he did was start a biotech company about 7 years ago. And he realized over time that the biotech company was not enough, that he needed both advocacy and legislation as well that kind of went hand in hand with the work that was going on with the biotech. And so in a way, what we were trying to do was to re-envision this idea that biotechs and foundations can work together for a common mission, which is often very much frowned upon here. And sometimes for good reason. But I think because we were plugged into not only the kind of the advocacy part of it, but also the legislative part, and on the biotech side, it allowed us to engage with patients on so many different levels. And as we became a little bit more mature in our organization, patients started to realize that, yes, they had an advocate and an ally working for them, and it became a lot easier to allow patients to gain that trust. And I think that's a very important thing. We never wanted to make a big splash about what we were doing, because we felt it was imperative to do the work and then share what we've done. And I think by putting that work in first allowed us to really be able to create those very important relationships with the patient community and that trust.
So imagine you're a drone and you could rise up over the universe of rare disease foundations. And you can look down and see everything they're doing. What are they doing well, and what are they not doing well?
Well, in the beginning I said there are over 400 rare cancer advocacy organizations. To me, that means there are 400 silos here in the rare cancer community. because unfortunately that is the reality of how things operate. Still, I feel I think that's changing. I think we are doing a much better job of reaching out, of talking to other patient groups, and finding out what other work is being done. But I don't think we're there yet. And I think as soon as we start to break down those barriers and are able to have conversations with others doing work without being seen as a competitor, we're going to move the needle forward much faster. We still struggle with data sharing, with tissue sharing. I mean, these are all issues that people here in this room have probably had firsthand experience with. The rare cancer community, though, is really a strong advocate for those types of things. And I think if there is one community that will see change or can enact that kind of change, it is the rare cancer community, because they are desperate for those things to work well so that we can have innovative treatments for these patients in the future. So I think we need to continue breaking down those silos, and we need to work together, because there are, I think, over 550,000 new rare cancer cases every year. And so if you are able to galvanize that community together under one mission, you have a very, very powerful group that can do a lot, instead of your individual groups and silos.
Great. I think we have time for just a few questions, if there are questions. Yes, Nita.
Thank you very much for this description and details of all that's happening right now. Could you provide a bit more information, Greg, about AARPA, particularly since it's under the NIH umbrella versus the NCI, which is separate, and how things would be divided? I fear that, and you probably have heard this often as well, NCI is sort of the fat cat and gets the money, where NIH would love to bring that budget back under NIH. How will that be protected? And wouldn't that have been a perfect opportunity to create something just for rare tumors?
So I have been arguing since 2007 that it should be an independent agency and not be in any way taking money out of the NIH NCI bucket. I have a different view of NCI, not as the powerhouse, but as a redheaded stepchild, as we say in Arkansas, because NIH has always resented NCI having its own direct budget with Congress. And the AARPA program is at NIH for the simplest of reasons. It was easier to do. It was easier to use their hiring authority, their transaction authority, their personnel rules than to start from scratch if they were independent of NIH. So they were put at NIH to be able to ride on the infrastructure, and the secretary retained the right to hire or to designate who would oversee it from his office. Okay, now the devil's in the details. What are they going to focus on? And I'm sure that rare tumors would be part of it, because as I was learning last night from Ben, there is so much, this is mind-boggling to me, but there's so much we don't know about the basic contents of a cell after all these years, that it is still a revelation every year. Almost every week, I read articles about, we just found a T cell that you don't have to train. Well, where has it been for the last 30 years? Was it out to lunch? I mean, what do you mean you just discovered it? Well, it's complicated. It's biology. So AARPA will set its own goals, but there will be plenty of reasons for them to do work in rare tumors, because you learn things that are applicable to all cancers when you look at these rare diseases. I really hope, and I'm pessimistic because Congress has a bad record on this, I really hope that they do not take money from the NIH NCI budget for AARPA, but that it's additive. But when FDA got user fees from the industry to increase their resources, Congress reduced their appropriation by the same amount. They just got the same amount of money, but from industry instead of from the government. This is not a good system. So it depends. The AARPA programs will depend on what kind of director they get. Whether they're a biologist, a physicist, a technologist, they will have a very big role in shaping the priorities. And that's all to be determined, but I hope it's determined quickly. And I point out, we need an NIH director. We need an NCI director. We need a permanent science advisor. We need a permanent head of the Office of Science and Tech Policy. I realize the world's on fire right now, so they're kind of busy. But they have to get those positions filled. People live and die by the day. We've all had this experience. One of my best friends died of multiple myeloma 3 years ago. CAR T therapies were not working for multiple myeloma 3 years ago. Now they are. So everything we can do to lengthen life for the next breakthrough, we've got to do. Go ahead.
But just to follow up, in that the moonshot, which you were very involved in, has been successful, and they've talked about Moonshot 2.0, and that's been introduced, but there's no appropriations for it.
Right.
So all those projects that were part of Moonshot and will stop if they are not, sort of fed into different other already established grant mechanisms.
That's right.
So
So what do we do?
it's conflicting in that you hate to see these projects that are up and going, investigators are engaged in everything, and then to start something essentially, even though it's at NIH from the beginning, that startup time, as you alluded to, will be, will affect patients. So
Yes.
So I guess, if you want things to continue, you sort of have to
Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
So the original Moonshot didn't get any money until the last day of December in 2016, after the election. Got $1.8 billion over 7 years. We will expect that they will get more money at the end of this year in the midnight hour, the way Congress works, because Biden's not going to let the Moonshot money disappear and the funding disappear. It's way too personal for him. So I am optimistic that Cures 2.0 that's been in Congress all year will eventually lead to the continuation of the NCI program, the FD. People don't realize the Cancer Moonshot was involved with 20 different agencies. When we left the White House after Trump was elected, those programs didn't stop. They were just ignored by the White House, but not by the patient community and not by NIH and NCI. It just kept going, but they just didn't have any coordination at the White House level. Now we do, and my former deputy, Danielle Carnival, whom we both worked with, is now the head of the new Cancer Moonshot, and I'm optimistic that it will do what we tried to do. We only had 9 months in 2016. They have 3 more years. We tried to engage as many people as possible. We tried to change the culture as much as possible and promote collaborations, and we tried to get money. They will have a much longer runway to do that than we did, but I'm very optimistic they will get the money. It's too important not to get the money. So we should probably end, I believe. I just want to say that my only skill is hiring really good people. It's a great skill to have if you're an old white man. And I am very proud that of the staff we had at the Biden Cancer Initiative, which ended when Biden announced for president because the lawyers said it'll be too confusing if people donate money to you and they have a political agenda. So we had to stop. But the 3 professionals I had on our staff all went on to run organizations for the first time. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud of Catherine's work at the Shepherd Foundation, where I was on the board. Danielle started I Am ALS. And my friend Lisa, who was the first person I hired at Faster Cures 20 years ago, is the head of the Smith Center for Arts and Healing in Washington, D.C. So I'm very, very proud that a whole new generation of people, especially women and women of color, are taking the lead in bringing together the patient organizations to save lives. And I really appreciate the support of the Taxel family for trying to help other Jed Ians in the world live the full, long life that they so richly deserve. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Mark, for having me.
Thank you.